Hey everybody, welcome back to the Law of One Spiritual Advice podcast. My name is Elle, and I am here again to read a quote from the Law of One, the raw material, and then I'm going to make some comments on it and just share my opinions with you about what it means to me or just what thoughts that it stimulates. So let's begin. This is going to be from session 70. You can find it at lawofone.info, llresearch.org/transcripts, or you can go to my website, theoneinfinitecreator.com, and I've made easy links to find all of the material and download it for free from their websites. So let's begin. This is session 70, and this one is going to be on the higher self, and like the topics-wise, we'll be speaking about higher self and space-time, how things are allegedly happening simultaneously, and the higher self's perspective and view in that. So the quote begins with Ra saying, quote, "You are existing at all levels simultaneously. It is specifically correct that your higher self is you in mid-sixth density, and in your way of measuring what you know as of time, your higher self is yourself in your future." And then they continue on a little bit of a different section. Quote, "The higher self does not manipulate its past selves. It protects when possible and guides when asked. But the force of free will is paramount. The seeming contradictions of determinism and free will melt when it is accepted that there is such a thing as true simultaneity." The end of quote. Law of One, Ra, session 70. All right. So let's kind of go back and break this down a bit. So you're existing at all levels simultaneously. All right, well, that is because you are one with all. The illusion of separation is what stops us from seeing that we are all one. However, that's there for a reason, and it's called the veil, and it's also because we are in space-time. So if you're going to think about, I will be talking about this a bit in this podcast, so just take in your mind there's the consideration that when you're in the illusion in the third density in your incarnate body, you would be incarnating within space-time, so space-time. And whereas your metaphysical existence and the perspective that you have when you are in spirit form, I suppose, like in your spirit, that would be time-space. So time-space you can think of as the metaphysical universe. So the way that I understand these two things, and I just want to point out that obviously I don't know these things for sure, it's just sort of what I understand from the material, but whenever somebody's referring to space-time, so our third density perspective that us humans tend to see from, we are seen in a linear fashion. So time begins, it goes on, and it ends. It seems to have a beginning and an end. Now, if you're going to consider what it's like to see things from the time-space perspective, so from the perspective of spirit or the metaphysical, it's more homogeneous in that all of time seems to be happening at once. I'm not sure if I'm completely correct, but I feel how it works is that my choice in any moment, so like right now, that both ripples forward and backwards in time, affecting everything. I feel like this is how Ra is describing all of time happening simultaneously, and thus it doesn't need to compensate anything forwards or backwards because all is reconciled immediately within the fluidity of unity. Unity is fluid. Time, I'm not sure if time is fluid, but in that sense, it just seems that any choice that you make in this moment right now, maybe it affects the past, maybe it only affects the future, but regardless, it's the only thing sort of within your power. But I feel that choice of this moment is going to affect your future and in essence affects the past because, even when people are looking forward in the future, they're seeing probabilities and possibilities. And so if there's a probability that in the future you're more willing to make that choice, then that seems to make sense that also in the past it can go in the reverse order too. This also is, in my opinion, why Ra says elsewhere that there are no mistakes, but there are surprises. How can there be a mistake within the perfection of the Creator? all is perfect, all always equals one, oneness and infinity. The idea is that the Creator is one, and therefore it will just always be that. It is always perfect. It will remain perfect and will end perfectly as it should be. You can extrapolate even further. I think Buddha even said, it is your resistance to what is that causes your suffering. And this is true, I feel. Within acceptance lies a great storehouse of grace and power. So if you accept the moment for it is, try not to feel like a victim of circumstance, and know that before you lies a series of choices. That is a great source of power, in that you have the power to make a choice that affects the entire creation. It affects the future, it affects the past, it affects you, it affects everybody within the circle of oneness, which is everybody that you know and think of, and everyone you have never even thought of. So now let's go into the higher self aspect of this. So they are indicating here, it is specifically correct that your higher self is you in mid-sixth density, and in your way of measuring what you know of as times, your higher self is yourself in the future. And then they also say, we'll leave that part for later. So your higher self is you in the future. Well, how is that a thing? So I suppose the way I picture it is that you have all your past selves and all your current selves, and those are all one thing in the perspective of space-time, right, and the physical and the 3D. Those seem to be all happening from beginning to end, which is true. But then from the time-space perspective, you as in spirit form, which is your higher self is like 6D, your indigo chakra connection, if you will, sixth density. So your higher self is you in 6D. And how the higher self came to be, from my understanding, is this. So there's evolution from the first density to the seventh density, and then through the eighth, which is a new octave of experience. So what you're doing is, when you're in sixth density, which is the density of unity, and you are then moving over into the seventh density, which I believe is the density of, what do they say, foreverness, something like this. But it's like union with the Creator. So before you step into sort of timelessness union with the Creator, your self, which is like really close to the end of sixth density, creates this higher self resource for you, which is a mid-sixth density version of you, and it contains all the past knowledge of all your previous incarnations that have ever happened. And you're also connected to God and Spirit in a way, in that you're not veiled from many other things as well, which leaves you with a higher perspective than maybe your lower self would have down here in the 3D aspect of you. And then on to the second part of the quote, in which it's talking about your higher self does not manipulate its past selves. It protects when possible and guides when asked. And it's funny how they say it's past selves, because to your higher self, every single incarnation before the higher self is a past self, just if you were wondering why they mentioned it that way. So they say it protects it when possible and guides when asked, but the force of free will is paramount. Now, what they're saying here is that you have come into a 3D land where you're incarnated behind a veil, and this is a specific reason for this. The reason is so you sort of are disconnected from the all-knowing of the universe and the all-knowing of God, and that you're perfectly loved at all times, and there's no need to really worry about it. You come into this density to be confused, to go behind the veil, to be sheltered from that higher reality, and so that you can make choices. The choices would be easy if you knew all of the truth, but we don't know all of the truth, and therefore it's difficult to make decisions. So we have to consider ethical things, moral things, how we feel in regards to being one with everyone else, or whether we think we're just a separate entity, right? And so this is the idea of you being down here in this lower density, and then you would want to somehow try to form a connection with that higher self, considering that it's a very good resource for your seeking, and that it can somewhat see the future. It knows all your lessons. It has everything you need to know. I would also make a connection to say that somewhat the unconscious part of your brain, your unconscious self, is somewhat the higher self as well. It somewhat speaks to you in dreams and tries to get the conscious self to sort of pick up the clues that it's dropping. However, it always does then come down to free will, and free will means that you are asking for help. Maybe you don't say, hey, higher self, please help me, but you absolutely can do that. But regardless, you're asking for help, you're asking God for help, whatever kind of help you're asking for, that's the kind of help that the higher self is there to give you. And in my seeking, maybe I'll just share with you that I've never gotten a 100% clear answer. It's more just that if you're hearing words in your head, that's probably your lower self, right? Like can't really trust words per se. What your higher self is going to be more like is going to be like intuition. You'll have a feeling, you'll have a sort of a bias, an inkling towards what you think you should do, and you'll maybe know that that's more right than something else. So I would think that intuition is sort of the higher self speaking to you, but you can make that connection stronger by asking and using your free will to ask and to seek answers and to know that you're not alone here and ask for help. I noted that Carla used to speak with her higher self in her head and in meditation. I can't assume anything of that nature for myself when it comes to seeking. I think that it's more just that feeling towards what feels right. And what feels right really is determined by our level of purity. If you're sort of low-level human desired seeking, I don't really have a greater way of putting it, that you're going to have a stronger bias in you towards, whenever you're seeking advice, your mind's going to offer you somewhat lower advice. If you have higher ideals and you have worked on yourself over time, your chakras and your energy centers and whatnot are going to be more open and activated and balanced. And in that, you'll have a stronger connection to that intuition and to the higher self, in which case what feels right will start to be what is right or what is more correct for you to do in that moment. But it takes time. So I would just say, if you're trying at first, if you haven't been working on yourself very long, just be patient, do a daily meditation. Things like this can strengthen the connection with the higher self. And I suppose lastly would just sort of leave it at that, which is to mention about focus and daily meditation. Nobody really likes to be told to meditate daily. I've kind of sucked at it, but at least just my personality, the type of person I am, is that I do still have a somewhat daily and consistent focus. I believe focus when it comes to spiritual matters and finding answers and getting help, focus is your number one thing. Focus is what means you want that answer. The will in you has the focus to be trained on seeking questions and finding answers. And the more daily that is and the more constant it is, the more powerful it is, which means that the answers and other synchronicities and other sorts of gifts, if you will, from intelligent infinity may find their way to you. So work on that focus and don't think about time, space, and space-time too much, because honestly, it's very confusing. And in my opinion, trying to reconcile space-time and time-space is hard for your brain, because your brain is literally created of the space-time configuration, in which case it doesn't really have any other way of thinking. It just always wants to think 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 in a linear fashion, in a logical fashion. Which is important, what I was kind of saying earlier about the lower mind. You have that, but you can balance it with the higher mind of intuition and softening the lower desires of the human aspects to a point where you lower them to a point where you can hear the intuition, you can hear the higher self, you can hear direction. So go ahead and give that a shot. And if you're just listening to this for the sake of just listening, then I hope that something in this serves you well. Thank you so much for listening. If you found any value in this, you can always access the material through my website, theoneinfinitecreator.com. I do this web podcast. I try to do one every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. So if you enjoy it, give us a like, a share, a subscribe, all that good stuff that everybody always asks you to do. It would mean a lot. So thank you so much, everybody. I will be back Friday with some more ramblings on spiritual stuff. Thanks. Have a good one. Love you guys. Bye.